Hey, this is Real Talk with the Pimpcron, and today we're discussing whether or not Age of Sigmar is just simply the better game. Now, I know most of you probably know me as a 40k player first and foremost, and you probably also know that I play Age of Sigmar as well, and have since AoS 1.0. Even when it didn't have points, I still played Age of Sigmar. That's actually when I got in to Warhammer Fantasy, essentially, is with Age of Sigmar 1.0, because I figured it was a very good jumping on point and it was kind of wonky at the time. I have no idea who thought it was a good idea to release a whole game system completely fresh and new with absolutely no points, but that seems like that was ill informed. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about AOS 3.0. There are a lot of things that kind of make me lean towards the idea that Age of Sigmar is actually just a better game. Now you're not right, you're not wrong for liking 40k more. I know there's obviously they're two different games and they have their strengths and weaknesses each, but I think for multiple reasons, Age of Sigmar is probably actually the better game, even if I may not enjoy that as much as 40k. But honestly, since I dislike Ninth Edition so much, probably do enjoy Age of Sigmar more than 40k. Now, there's that other little nagging tidbit here where some people just like fantasy stuff, some people just like sci-fi stuff. Obviously, there's no real wrong answer there. You can like one or like the other, whatever. But objectively, first off, I know a lot of people think that the Age of Sigmar models overall look a lot better than the 40k models. The way they're designed, the motion of them, the creativity, and all of that. I actually tend to agree. Age of Sigmar benefits a lot from having more newer models in its range than 40k does. So just off the starting mark, Age of Sigmar has newer models and they are benefiting from the new technology, and I feel almost like it's a little easier to go a little more creative and a little more crazy with fantasy than it is sci-fi anyway, but certainly sci-fi has its benefits. I would still say that Age of Sigmar's models range in general looks way better, and they've spent a lot more time and effort to revamp that and make it look better. Now they are starting to do that with 40k as well. You saw the orcs get redone, Space Marines have upgraded. Necrons have gotten some new models in the last decade, but a lot of things are being revamped at least. So in the column of what the models look like, Age of Sigmar, I think hands down has the better model range, even if you don't prefer fantasy over sci-fi. Now another thing is, Age of Sigmar's rules are generally simpler than 40k. Now I know some people like complex rules, etc., minutia and all of that, but ultimately the goal of a game is to get you stuck in, rolling dice, and your units have different abilities and they've got different matchups against other units and all of that. And in a perfect world, in a perfect game, you would have all of that with absolutely no rules at all. Like it would just flow together so well that everything just works. But of course that's not realistic and all of that. So Age of Sigmar, I think, personally, gets the job done just as well as 40k does, but it does it simpler. Most of the units can only take one type of weapon, so you've got your 10 or 20 or 30 guys, and they all have the same weapon, which means they all roll at the same time. You might have one special weapon or a sergeant or something with a different weapon, but generally, you're rolling all of those attacks at the same time. What I also like about Age of Sigmar over 40k is that when you're trying to point out the different weapons and the different units and things like that, the strength versus toughness dynamic of 40k makes it extremely hard to accurately. I've said this before. A las cannon shooting a guardsman unit, right, is basically worthless. You're gonna pop one guardsman and that's that. A las cannon hitting a land speeder or a rhino or something like that is way more value than it would be against a single guardsman. It's because of the strength and the damage and all that. So that makes sense that it would be very hard for them to actually balance the rules, because if you take all armor and I take all anti-infantry, well then I should be able to bring way more anti-infantry stuff, because my anti-infantry is going to do almost nothing to your armor. So arguably, you should bring 1,000 points. I should bring 1,500. But of course, that's not the way the game works. But I'm just showing you right there that every list, a point is not a point necessarily. And that cost the variance in that cost can make very lopsided games. Whereas Age of Sigmar, everything hits and wounds on static figures. Now, I know for some of you that's kind of weird. How can this guy wound on a 4 up against a Grot and wound on a 4 up against Archaon, right? Well, that's a little weird. I get that. But from a gameplay standpoint, from a game design standpoint, you can actually see that, okay, this guy has 2 hits. I'll make it easy. 4 hits, okay? He gets 4 attacks. He hits on 4s, wounds on 4s. So I know for each one of these guys in this unit with their 4 attacks, 4s to hit, 4s to wound, they're going to miss half their hits, so that's 2 hits, and they're going to miss half their wounds, that's 1 wound. So I know that a block of, let's say, 40 guys in this unit are statistically going to do 40 wounds with their 4 attacks each. You can actually work that out, and now I know rend does affect save in a circumstantial way, but you can reliably know the damage output. And that is a much more reliable method to point out units. So that inherently means that if they know how many points X, Y, or Z damage output is for a unit, then it's far easier to manage the points and balance the armies and all of that. Yes, of course, they make missteps sometimes. Yes, of course, Age of Sigmar can be just as unbalanced occasionally with their new releases as 40k, but I think overall, Age of Sigmar is a much more balanced game because of the static hit and wound rolls. Another thing is that the game plays quicker, and the reason for that is that by and large, the average save in Age of Sigmar is a 4-up or a 5-up. Very rarely do you find someone other than, let's say, Chaos Warriors now. They got a 3-up, which is stupid, but um, other than characters with a 3-up save. So that means more bodies are being taken off the field quicker. And of course, there's a fine line there. You don't want, oh, turn 1, all my people are off the board, but you also don't want everyone to be so darn tanky that no one took any casualties at the end of the game. So my personal preference would be that a game is quicker than slower. So I would much rather play a 2-hour game than a 6-hour game. And somewhere in there is where you want your game to be. So Age of Sigmar does play quicker, and I enjoy that. Another thing I like is the alternating attack sequence in Melee. So of course, whoever's turn it is gets to activate the first unit, and then the opponent activates one, you activate one, etc., going back and forth. I think that is far more balanced in gameplay wise than 40k with all the chargers strike first, etc., etc. And I think for obvious reasons, right? In 40k, you can set up multiple charges and you get to just decimate the enemy. For Age of Sigmar, of course, being that you're forced to do that back and forth, it's far more balanced and it's more damage being dealt on either side evenly, in theory at least. Of course, now that takes us to currently, Age of Sigmar 3.0 has a bunch of stratagems essentially that are universal for all the armies, right? You've got all out defense, all out attack, redeploy, all of that. And they have very few abilities in each army, but like command abilities and things like that. But they all get these universal ones, and that is really, really helpful. I think potentially this is being recorded prior to 10th edition at 40k. Uh, but I think they might be doing that more for 10th edition, coming out with more universal stratagems and fewer codex stratagems, but that's slightly yet to be determined as of the time of this recording. But if they did go in that direction, that would be way a big step in the right direction, I think, for them to balance out the game better with stratagems that everybody can use. I know this might be a nitpick, but the fact that you have to stay 3 inches away from enemies in Age of Sigmar at least means that you do have a failable charge. There is no such thing as an unfailable charge in Age of Sigmar. Uh, I mean, I guess technically, if you get +1 to charge, like my Beast of Chaos or someone does, then technically you could get an auto charger, but unless you have an ability otherwise, there are not automatic charges. 40k on the other hand do have auto charges, right? You got to stay an inch away, but you roll 2d6 to charge, you're in. Just from a game design standpoint, that also helps because you always want that little chance of an upset or something that's not going the way you think it's going to go. And that's basically all the reasons why, objectively, I think Age of Sigmar is better overall than 40k in game design and miniatures and all of that. Now, my biggest gripe, and I know a lot of you are probably yelling this at the screen right now, but my biggest gripe with Age of Sigmar is I do not care for the initiative roll on each turn. I really think they could do away with the initiative roll and completely, almost nothing would change, except for the fact that you would not get screwed sometimes by failing an initiative roll, right? Because arguably, if you never win the initiative roll, it's going to be I go, you go, I go, you go the whole game anyway. And oh, is that all broken? No, it's not. So really, if they just took it out, it's really not a big deal. I know some of you Age of Sigmar players do like the initiative roll, but I think it has more of a potential for harm than good from a game design standpoint, and I really don't think it's very useful. My only other major complaint about Age of Sigmar as far as the model lines and everything. Their models are gorgeous, etc., but Age of Sigmar does have more miniature factions or micro factions than 40k does. Where like, oh, my flesh eater courts, they've got like I don't know, a handful of characters and 2 monsters and like 5 other units. Or even worse is the Fire Slayers with their, what is it, like 10 characters and 3 units or something stupid. Age of Sigmar does suffer from that, but many of these armies are new. So they only released a couple units for them, and then I'm sure later on they'll get more. Whereas 40k factions are by and large pretty, fleshed out from the get go. But those are my two main complaints about Age of Sigmar. But those really aren't. Uh, they're not too impactful on the game. They're kind of ancillary. So hopefully you enjoyed this talk, and I certainly did. I love just talking away into a microphone and just lighting up your ear with the vibrations of my voice. So we will see you next week on the Pimpcron Warhammer podcast. We would like to thank our beautiful, sexy, good-smelling Patreon patrons over at Patreon and GameMat.eu for supporting the show, and of course, Panhandle3D.etsy.com. I will see you next week, guys.